All right, it is a minute past 8:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. This morning, we're going to kick things off for Microsoft Week with Nick Miller. He's going to be talking to us about Power Automate, and he was a huge help yesterday in the chat for anyone that attended those sessions, and I'm sure he's going to be a huge help today as well. So, without further ado, I'll let you go ahead and kick this off, Nick.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Miller, and I'm a senior cloud solution architect here at Microsoft. And I especially deal with the Power Platform and dedicated to education customers. Um, Today's session is just I named this the field guide to Power Automate. It's gonna be quick, kind of high level, kind of bare bones, like what makes Power Automate flow, what makes it do what it does, and then dive into some demos. We'll do live demos, so we'll see how fast the hamsters turn on the wheel and see if it actually builds the stuff that we want to use. And some simple things, we'll do some more complicated things, and we'll use some Copilot to build some things as well. So a little about myself. I've been at Microsoft for, gosh, a little over 5 years now. Came in as a SharePoint expert and a developer, and within the first couple of months saw the huge need for Power Platform. And I was a InfoPath guru and SharePoint architect for years, previous 10 years ish, and just kind of dove into that when I came into Microsoft. So it wasn't very difficult to transition as a lot of stuff we do with Power Apps. We start with SharePoint, and we have the same kind of logical ideas with taking InfoPath and SharePoint Designer workflows and utilizing the services that Microsoft has built and published as a service rather than just a workflow engine or a forms tool to associate with another product. A little about myself, I'm a big gamer. I enjoy RPGs and playing Xbox and things of that nature. But also, I've been a personal chef over 20 years. Have a wine collection of a little over 250 bottles dating back roughly 25 years that I put together in the last eight-ish years. I love to cook and do dinner parties, and I love to travel. I've driven cross country 5 times. Driven through Tuscaloosa a handful of times when I go by to see my cousin in Auburn, or just feel the need to just take a different road headed towards Memphis, St. Louis, where I got family, and just take a different road back to Florida. Originally, I'm located in Orlando, Florida, so it is currently almost 80 degrees. Uh, and it's probably only going to get more hot and humid as the day goes on. So diving right in with Power Automate, the first thing we have to talk about are connectors. And just to make sure stuff is going all right. If anybody has any questions or whatever, please pop off mute, interrupt me, ask me. Totally fine. It's not going to hurt my feelings. It's okay. And so the first thing we got to talk about are connectors with Power Automate, because it's not just Power Automate, but the Power Platform. That's how it's built. It's built on being able to connect to our data anywhere, right? Versus SharePoint Designer, which only connected to SharePoint. Or if we were using we were using some type of REST API, we could build some type of integration there, but it wasn't very easy and it wasn't out of the box. And so Microsoft has come to the point to where, hey, you know what? We want to be able to use a workflow engine that is more than just SharePoint or more than just a local file server. What are they? We have over 1,200, I believe. When I looked the other day, I think the number's at 1,275. Remember when that number was 75. So it's been a long road. Like I said, over 1,200 different types of connectors, most of them dealing with the Microsoft 365 cloud stack. Most of those are what are called standard connectors. We'll dive into those here in just a second. But standard and are included with our Office 365 licensing. So being able to connect to SharePoint, Outlook, OneDrive, Excel Online for Business. Let's see, PowerPoint. I mean, a whole bunch of different things we can connect to within Power Automate to be able to connect to our Microsoft Forms, to be able to connect and drive our business solutions from our standard everyday things. And then we also have premium connectors, which require a premium license with the Power Platform, which allows us to connect to more to the third party. Most of the third party connectors connect
Hey,
to.
Nick.
Yeah.
We're having some people having trouble seeing your screen. Would you mind unsharing and resharing it? I can see it fine, but it seems like about half of us can't.
Sure.
Sorry about that.
Try this one here. Try doing that. How does that work?
Can we get some thumbs up or thumbs down?
Okay, Josh says he can see it. Mike says it's back.
Great. Thanks a
Okay.
lot, Nick.
Yeah. So luckily I didn't change screens or anything. Still talking about standard premium connectors. Premium connectors, we use premium licensing, right? So if we're connecting to on-premises data sources such as SQL Server, anything stored in Azure SQL on VMs, etc., we have to connect to an on-premises data gateway, and that requires us to have that premium license associated with that user account building that Power Automate flow, along with being able to connect to Dataverse, things of that nature. We can connect to Dropbox, Google Drive, things of that nature, which don't require premium. That's a standard connector, but requires an account on that side, right? It requires an account on that side. We also have what are called independent publisher connectors. Kind of don't recommend using them, but you'll see them. They'll have this weird icon, that red little people icon. It'll say independent publisher. If we're looking at the details over in the Microsoft documentation for that connector, it gives the ability for us as regular end users to build connectors and submit them for publication through Microsoft to be able to share with other users to be able to do it. So it's very similar to like building a custom connector, but instead of it just being local to you or your organization or that particular environment, we're saying, hey, this could be used, to connect to these various APIs that don't require licensing, things of that nature. But those independent publishers have to abide by the security requirements that Microsoft provides. And so the only one that I've tried to play with, I think, was trying to integrate Zoom with Microsoft Teams. Not sure why this customer wanted to, but there's a connector there, so we took some time to dive into it. It was an independent publisher, but the thing is that connector, they didn't follow up with the required security protocols, and the connector was there, but it didn't work. So we ended up having to build a custom connector anyway to connect with the Zoom APIs to be able to update Teams meetings with Zoom links for their student base. So there are those there. You can take a look at those. I much prefer, more so recommend first party owned by Microsoft, third party owned by partners, and those other third party companies such as SAP, ADP, ServiceNow, Confluence, also known as Jira, and use their connectors, but they're listed as third party, but not necessarily listed as independent. As I also mentioned, we talked about custom connectors. This gives us the ability to create our connections using APIs that we manage or own, right? Whether they're APIs up in Azure, using Azure API management, or if we're connecting to APIs over on the web. So like utilizing the Google APIs for either Google Analytics or Google Maps or something like that, we could create a custom connector that uses the information that we are wanting to supply from within the organization at Alabama to use those APIs to return data back into Power Automate. But they can connect to any data anywhere kind of thing. Does require a premium license to use custom connectors. And so us as admins can kind of moderate how that's handled as to what APIs you can connect to with custom connectors in specific environments. But they are there to leverage and expand what we can do within Power Automate. Questions so far? All right. So first thing we're going to talk about as far as like what makes a flow is we have the trigger and actions. What is a trigger? It is the very first action. It is what instigates a flow to run. So a trigger is an event that starts a cloud flow, right? So if you want to get a notification in Microsoft Teams where someone sends you an email, in this case, receiving an email is the trigger that starts the flow. right? We can have when an item is created in SharePoint, when an item is modified in SharePoint, when a new channel message is added to a specific Teams channel in Teams, when a new email arrives to your inbox or maybe is flagged or is sent from your manager. We can have those be just about any kind of trigger that's available with our connectors to be able to initiate an automated Cloudflow. However, you can only have one trigger in a flow. The very first action is that trigger, and everything after that is just an action. So the types of clouds, types of flows that we have available to us that will be using these triggers, the most, 95% of your flows are going to be automated flows, meaning that somebody's going to upload a document, somebody's going to edit a document, or add an item to SharePoint, or add a record to a database, or an email is going to be received. Those are going to be automated flows. So it's independent of a button push. It's independent of an application. It is waiting for some kind of action to happen somewhere else, right? But we're not necessarily having to open an app on our phone to say, oh, hey, do this, right? So automated flows, they start by triggering some type of an event. So in this example, you'll see here, now we know that Twitter has been renamed to X, but like when a new tweet is posted and it's monitoring a specific Twitter page, right? Or so an X page or whatever. The next type of cloud flow is an instant flow. You're going to use these. I use these all the time for testing. And you'll see here in the demos that I've got kind of lined out and the stuff I'll build out. I'll start with a manual trigger, meaning that I have to actually click a button, whether it's in the browser or the app on my phone, to say, hey, start this flow, run this, do this. I have to manually trigger that flow. We also use instant flows if we are that's the type of flow we're going to use if we're going to utilize the parent-child relationships within solutions with flows. So that way flows can start other flows based on particularly maybe a switch statement, right? To be able to go in and say, hey, this flow triggered because I got this email, but it's because it's from my manager, I'm going to also post in Teams. Well, I can build those actions in the flow, or I can create another instant flow in my solution that says, hey, I'm just going to provide it with parameters of where I want to do things, but this flow is always going to say, post a message to a Teams channel. Okay, set up my parameters so that way I can use that same child flow in multiple flows to say, oh, hey, I want to post it to Teams. Boom, here we go. What Teams channel? Okay, here's this one, here's this one. I'll supply it with parameters, and I go and think, oh, hey, here's my email message from a manager. It goes into a chat. So instant flows allow us to manually start those, or we can manually start them from starting a child flow in Power Apps. I'm sorry, in Power Automate from a parent flow, or we can start them also from clicking a button in Power Apps. But it's an instant flow, but it's a different trigger. The third type we have are scheduled cloud flows. So from an administrative standpoint, we can have it to where, if we need things to run, like do some checks and balances, such as, maybe we need to update permissions on SharePoint, on a SharePoint list based on a Microsoft group, right? And so we can monitor a Microsoft group, and when something changes or have a query against another list that says, hey, here are the people who should have access. However, we need to be able to add them to a specific group to share applications with, like a request form. We could say, hey, either on an automation flow, or we can say, hey, we want to monitor this every hour, every 30 minutes. So this flow kicks off and does that check and balance. And if the person doesn't exist in the group, it adds them to the group automatically. That's just kind of one example. But we use scheduled cloud flows to do a lot of different things. What is that? We do a lot of different things to be able to do checks and balances and things that just may need to run and do checks once a week, kind of thing. So with that, moving on from triggers and types of flows, we have actions. Actions are anything that happen after a trigger, and they can be from any one of those 1,200 plus connectors that we have available. So we have 1,200 plus connectors. Well, every connector has a set of trigger actions. Some only have one. Some have more than one. Like Dataverse and SharePoint, they have roughly about 15 to 20 different types of triggers that we can use. In addition to, they also have actions, right? Some connectors only have one or two actions, such as the Word Online for Business connector. It only has two: apply to template, create document, right? That's all. Or convert the Word document, right? So you can convert it to PDF or whatever you want. It only has two actions, but there are others, such here we see Outlook. We have like 20 or 30 different actions that we have available to us within that particular action. What is it by definition? It's an operation flow will execute in one step of the flow. For example, posting the message to Teams. You can have multiple actions. We can build them in different types of controls, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. And some actions offer special, more advanced options, such as send an email message with a high priority, or you can add attachments. You can send it from a shared mailbox. It's a number of different things that we can do from actions. And this example here is sending an email. So this is an example of what an action looks like, showing all the advanced parameters. We have, grab a little laser pointer here. We have here, these are the starred ones. They're the to, subject, and body. That's always going to be there for send an email action. But we also have 7 advanced ones. So meaning that we can send from. So if we're sending on behalf of someone, we can pop that information in there. If we want to automatically CC other people or other distribution lists or shared mailboxes, we can do that along with blind carbon copy. We can add attachments. So if we're creating and generating documents based off SharePoint lists and mapping them to a template and creating that PDF file, we can automatically attach it to an email and send it. We can set sensitivity labels and also set up who the reply to goes to. So if we're building this with a service account and we want if people have a question, we don't want it to come to the service account because we're not monitoring that. If we're building this flow for benefits over in HR, then we have the reply to go to that distribution list or that shared mailbox for the HR benefits team. So questions go directly to them. And it takes us as developers of the flow out of the equation for the business line, right, between the end user and the business owner. And of course, we can set the importance level. There are different types of actions that we have within any type of connector, different types of actions. I call them controls kind of things. The built-in actions add more are things that are built into Power Automate. So we see here we have this control option, right? Those are built-in actions. Anything that we see with variables here or data operations, flow button for mobile, that's our start the manual. Our instant flows start with a button click. Power apps, Power Virtual Agents, also known as Copilot Studio or Copilot Agents. And then our triggers here, like if we want to schedule or use Copilot skills. Controls are for built-in actions are a set of, and that was this, there's a set of operations that give you the ability to implement logic and control through the execution of the flow. The first type of control, and when I mean control, when I pop back over here, that's if we add in this control here. I believe there's 6. It's been a minute since I counted. The first one is a condition, right? It lets you do if logic, right? If this equals this. If it's true, go down this branch. If it's false, go down this branch. You can nest them on down the line. You can do nested if statements, just as if you would do it in any other coding language or Excel if you wanted to, and you'll get old VB days, or PowerShell, Python, whatever. But we can build the nesting if logic along with, as you can see here, let me zoom in. You can see here, it's kind of blurry, but we can add, for as far as our conditions, we can add and or logic to a single condition. So we don't necessarily have to do the nesting if, but we can build in if and or logic into a single parameter. Next up is a switch statement. Switch statement works when a value is equal to something. Right? We can't use an if, can't use greater than, less than, etc. It has to be an equal to for the cases that we have available to us. Let me zoom in on that so we can kind of see. And so we say, okay, when an email arrives in the switch statement, all right, well, what is it looking at? Well, the parameter is it's looking on the subject. And if it equals something, a specific value that this subject is going to have. Say the email's being sent from another Power Automate for approval, right? We may have the subject line be something very specific, and this flow does something else based on whatever that subject line is. But it has to be an equals parameter, and we're allowed to do multiple cases. And if it doesn't match any of those cases, then it defaults into an else statement, right? Basically, like, hey, if none of these happen, none of these are equal, then there's a default line. We always do this, right? So then it's like, oh, we don't have a dedicated branch for this. Well, they're just going to send that to whomever the supervisor is of the person who sent it. For example. The next type of control is an apply to each. This is our for each looping, depending on how you want to define it. But basically, what it does is that if we have an array of items, such as, hey, let's get files from a SharePoint list, right, or get items from a SharePoint list, and we need to do something on that, or get me all of my events over the last week from my Outlook calendar. That's brought back in an array. It's a table. And then when we use that, we say, hey, we want to create a file based on whatever, create a file based on whatever that event is or that list item. It's going to drop it into an apply to each, and whatever we put inside the apply to each happens on every record in that table. So every object in the array. The next one is a do until. That means like, hey, you know what? We want you to keep doing this until this value is met. This is how we can build a reminder function within an approval flow to be able to say, hey, you know what? We're going to send this approval, but you know what? We're going to check every day to see if this approval's been completed. If not, then we're going to send that person an email saying, hey, you have an approval that you need to complete. And we would use a do until to say, hey, has this been approved? Does it, using variables and a couple other methods to say, hey, we're waiting for this to change, right? Does approval equal complete? No. Okay, until it does, it's going to sit there and do the do until. So it's our do until, do while loop, kind of what it looks at. And I'll kind of zoom in on that little piece because it's here in this other little midsection here, this little do until piece. So it loops until a specific thing is done. We can set the number, how long, like it can take an hour before it times out, or we can do it up 30 days if we wanted to, or a max number of rotations. How many times are we going to loop this thing? The defaults are 60 in 1 hour, to kind of keep the service clean, so that we don't build a flow that just sits and burns and sends massive emails all day and all night. We also have what's called a scope. This is how we group stuff together, group sets of actions or conditions, right, within our Power Automate flow. So if we have stuff that's, getting information and then building our approval information and then sending the approval and waiting for the and sending the reminders and then notifying end users of the outcome. We can group those things together in using the scopes control. We also have a control that's called terminate. So if we get to a spot where, like specifically a switch statement, where it doesn't map and it doesn't do what we need it to do and it goes to that default else, we can send a notification to the owner or the flow owner or the requester to say, hey, you didn't fill this out correctly. You needed to choose 1, 2, 3, or 5. And then we're going to terminate that flow. And so they'll have to do it again. And then the flow kicks back off. So that way the flow just doesn't go into a suspended state or just goes into all this failed because it didn't map to anything. And lastly, our two other controls we have is a delay and a delay until. This is one of the ways that we can pause, right? Like in our reminders thing. Hey, you know what? Once this approval starts, we're going to go into this do until and we're going to wait 24 hours or wait 1 day. And then once that 1 day is over, it does the check. Hey, has this stuff been done? No, let's send a reminder email, comes back to the top of the loop, and then it waits another day. So it allows us to be able to be specific whenever we are building those types of loopings, and to make sure that instead of sending 60 within 2 to 3 minutes, it actually does our delay, and our 60 is now acceptable, right? pop these up here so I can talk and you can read while I speak. Data operations allow us to like do some manipulation and do some debugging within our Power Automate flow. So the compose action I use all the time to be able to say, hey, what does the output of this response look like? If I want to know what the SharePoint ID is on it, or if I want to know the document ID associated with that file in OneDrive or SharePoint, I can actually drop that value into a compose and actually see what it looks like so that I know the data type I'm working with, so I can go ahead and use that and apply it in other actions. The join combines elements of an array into a single string with a specific delimiter. So if we have a table of 5 records and we want to make it into a string, well, we can take the data from there, from record 1, make it a string delimited by an up caret or a semicolon or a forward slash or a pipe, and it puts it into a string. A select operation allows us to say, hey, of this massive table that we have, we want to transform and reshape the objects into the array. So instead of having 50 columns, we just need 6. And so we build a separate array using the select statement to be able to say, hey, from 50 columns, we only need these 6, so that we're not having to look at all this data when we're actually going to do the next part of the piece, which is filter the array. Right, where you can filter an array by a specific value. So we can say instead of having 500 records, we only have the 12 that we need. Parse JSON is one that's you're going to use more often than not to be able to take information from a JSON response, because it's all OData works off JSON. Power Automate lives on OData. So we'll be able to get that response from SharePoint and then put it into a way that we can just type into our actions and say, oh, hey, I need the column from this array. And we can say, oh, it's the email column. Parse JSON allows to take this big JSON text and then put it into a method to where, oh, hey, this is an array and here's our columns. And I can say, oh, give me the email first name and last name inside of an email body to send to whomever. We can do that, and then it puts it in apply to each and applies that to every object in that JSON array. We also have a create CSV table that allows us to convert a JSON array into a comma separated values table to be able to create a CSV file. And then, of course, we can create HTML tables on the fly using a JSON array to be able to be displayed inside of an email body or display on web pages, etc. on down the line. The next built-in action that we have that's important to us is going to be variables. You have to initialize every variable that you are going to use at the very top of your Power Automate flow, and then after that, you're going to have to set the variable, right? And you'll use variables within the entire portion of the flow to be able to pass objects in, grab information, update, maybe combine things. The data types that we have available are Booleans, Boolean values, which are true, false, integers, right, which are whole numbers, positive and negative, plus 0. Then we got floats, those are decimals. String values, which are text, objects, which can be records, and then arrays, obviously, which are tables. We also have the parallel branching. So like within every little plus sign that we have here, we have the option to add an action, or we can add a parallel branch. And when we click that, it actually splits it out and says, oh, okay, well, what action do you want to add? Oh, well, we had notified team of a received report, right? Post in a channel. Then we're like, okay, now save that report in SharePoint over in that team site, in that whatever channel that we're in. We just go in and drop it in. And so we can do that in parallel to where it does it in parallel rather than sequential. The other piece that we have to worry about when we're looking at any actions, we have settings. And what I'm going to point out here are a couple of things. One is pagination that we see here. So by default, like I said, Power Automate runs on OData, and there are limits to how many records we can call, right? And once it gets to that magic number of 100 or 500, OData says, oh, that's all we're going to pull back. But there may be actually more that fit our query. So we turn on pagination, and we put it to the max threshold, or you can put 10,000. The max threshold is 100,000 records per call, but it makes it to where we don't have to sit here and loop this call and build it into an array variable at 5,000 records at a time or 100 records at a time. We don't have to build that out. We can say, hey, pagination, increase the threshold so it gets all 872 or 612 records when I say get items from a SharePoint list. Other common actions here that we have is the I guess it's not here. Asynchronous pattern, timeout, and retry, right? So we can set a threshold on how long we want to let this thing run if it fails, right? By default, it's P1D, which is, I don't know why, I don't know where the text comes from. I used to know, but I've long since forgotten. But the 1D, 1 day, right? If we did 3M, 3 minutes. Okay, so and there's a T in there somewhere like PT, like 29D gives us 29 days, something along those lines. If we want this thing to time out after 29 days. We also have the ability to copy and paste. This is a new functionality within the last year, using the Modern Designer, to where if we have a group, right, whether it could be an entire scope, a single action like this join operation, right, or an apply to each, or just the save report. We can right click on any one of these and we can say copy action, and then we can go click on the plus sign, and if we have an action or a group or a section copied, it'll give us the option to paste the action. Super helpful, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel, like especially if you have to do this in multiple teams or multiple SharePoint sites. We can say, oh yeah, okay, we're just going to copy this scope and we're going to paste it down here at the bottom, and then just change which SharePoint site and teams that we need to post this report to. Questions on actions? Okay, we're almost through the slides here. Bear with me. We're going to talk a little bit about moving stuff, right? So most of us, when we're building, we're going to be in the default environment, which is where we have our default access. I'm not sure if Alabama has set up for environment routing and developer plan environments yet, but we all need to kind of know this. So the export and import using the legacy functionality. So anytime that we have a Power Automate flow, we can move it from anywhere to anywhere, right? We can do this. And so if our flow is not within a solution, right, and I'll demonstrate, kind of show what that is. It's just a container. If it's just a flow that we created in our default environment, and it's like, oh, you know what? We need to connect to the student database. Well, we can't do that in the default environment. Our admins say, well, hey, you have to move this flow over into a different environment. How do we do that? Well, in our flow details, there's a cool little export button, and we can just say export as package right here. And so when we export as package, it exports it as a zip file. We name it whatever kind of what we want to name it as when we're typing in our information, and then it puts a date time at the end of that file name .zip. That's our flow, and it brings in all the connections that we need to connect to, so we can easily unpack it and pull and export it out of our default environment and bring it into the appropriate environment to be able to connect to the student databases, depending on what Power Automate is doing. The other type of way to do this is through solutions, where instead of just a single flow, maybe you have 6 flows that are working together as part of this process. Well, you would create a solution first, right? Or create a solution after, and then add your flows into that solution. And then once you're in that solution, you can click export. You'll see it over here in the overview section when we're looking at solutions. And then it exports, and you'll export it as an unmanaged solution if you're moving from default to another environment, if it's not a production set. If we're just moving things, we export it, and then we go over to our target environment. We click on solutions, and then we just click import solution. It'll walk us through a wizard. It'll import it in the background, and when it's finished, it'll let you know. And the last piece of this puzzle is naming your flows, right? As you're building flow, if you're building flows in Power Automate, it's going to start naming this stuff by whatever your trigger is, whatever your actions are, until it maxes out the character limit, right? When we see things like this as administrators, we know that, oh, somebody didn't name it correctly. They could have used a template, something along those lines. Or we just don't know we can rename them. So when we're creating our flow in the top left, you'll see things up here. Usually we'll start with like Untitled 1. We can actually just click in there and name it what we want to name it. It can be department specific. As you can see here, this one says, hey, send an email notification when a new car is added to the list, right? Very explicit, exactly what it's doing. You can name them to be appropriate. And in addition to that, you can also add a description to your flow to add more information about what your flow is doing, what data sources it's connecting to, things of that nature. In addition to naming our flows, we have action names and notes. So when we add an action, it's going to pull in and say, oh, hey, this is the name of our action. We can have get email multiple times. You could have compose note multiple times, set variable multiple times. Thing is that what's it setting a variable of? Let's rename that. Rename the action to be specific as to what it's doing. Oh, get email with what? Oh, with reports attached, right? So it's looking for a specific subject line potentially or from a certain email address. And it's only looking and seeing if it has attachments. That said, oh, well, that makes a lot better sense if I'm coming in and have to fix it or have to work on it 2 years after the fact because I don't remember what I built yesterday, let alone what I built a year ago. So it helps me as a developer to say, oh, hey, oh, this thing's getting reports with attachments. Okay, so the next things are dealing with attachments. And one of the last pieces here is error handling. Within the settings, we can actually have it to where, hey, if something fails, right? Normally it says, hey, go to the next action when the previous one is successful. We can actually change that to say, hey, if this thing fails or is skipped, right, then we want to do some other action. So this is the way that we can do, instead of if this, then that with a condition, we can actually do it in line with what's happening here. So if this is successful and this errors out, skip this. So it allows us to be able to do some interesting things there. All right. Any questions from the slide deck before I dive into our demo? Okay. Like I said, please come off mute, interrupt me. Not going to hurt my feelings. It's going to be fun. So with Power Automate, we have a number of things that we can do directly from make.powerautomate.com. By default, it's going to bring you to University of Alabama default, right? I'm pretty sure it probably says that. It could say U of A, number of different things, but it's going to have default in parentheses over here. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. That's where everybody has the ability to build. And but if you're building things for your department, or if you're building things for a particular college at the university, you may have a specific environment that you need to be building in rather than the default, because it may have the ability to do more things that you need it to do. So just be aware of what environment you're in when you're up here in the top. So I'm in a developer environment here that I have for EDU Dev, and I have a number of flows that I've already built. But one of the things we can do, we can also start with templates. So if we click on templates over here, there's also this new, click on more and discover. There's a catalog in here. Let's do a control catalog. Yeah, it's not here in this tenant yet. It was recently announced at last month at the Power Platform Conference that, oh, hey, we're kind of revamping what templates are. But these are ways that we can start. First one I'm going to do, I'm going to start with approvals, right? And there's a whole slew of different types of approvals that we can do that are already templated out and ready to go. And you can take a look and see how many times this template's been used. This one, 62,000 times. This one, 161,000 times. That somebody's clicked on this template and have imported it into and created a flow based off this template. And it tells you exactly what it's going to do, right? Start an approval task when a file is added to SharePoint. Sounds great. Let's use that one. And so it tells you when you click on that template what it's going to do. It checks and says, hey, we're using these connections, but we need to make sure that we have green check marks, right, when we have things clicked in here. And so I'm just going to click where it says sign in. And so it's going to create these connections here within within this environment for me for these various connectors. So we're connectors, so we're using Office 365 users. That's our Office profile. Approvals, obviously. We got Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and Outlook. So I've got green check marks all the way down the line here, and I'm going to click continue. And now it's going to say, hey, what SharePoint site you want to look at? So it looks up and says, what do you have access to? What have you been to lately? I'm going to use this Power Platform development site. And then it's going to say, hey, what list do you want to monitor? I'm going to use, since it says list, but we're looking at library. So I'm going to click on documents. That's my document library. And like, hey, what folder did you want to monitor? Right. Well, if I click in here, it doesn't do anything, but I can click this little folder picker over here and take a look. And it looks up to the SharePoint site and says, oh, what do you want us to watch for? Well, we chose documents. That's that shared documents location. If I click in there, and this is a Microsoft Teams, and notice it's at, we have this licensing information, right? If I go deeper, it says, oh, here we go. Do we have any subfolders? No, we don't. Well, there's no back button, so I have to go back and click that. And so I'm not just going to monitor one folder within that SharePoint library. I'm going to do it all. I'm going to say, hey, I want you to monitor what's dropped into shared documents at the top level. And then who do you want to assign the user, the approval to? Well, you know what? I'm just going to type in, see if it does a search for my admin account. And look at that, it does. There's Nick, the IT guru administrator. That's who I want to be able to approve this. And so I can also edit in advanced mode, which takes this and puts it into the flow and says, oh, hey, fill all this information in. I'm going to use the template version though, and click create, and then it's going to build our flow. We're going to go take a look at it. Because I also have Cora over here, and I'm going to make sure that she has access to where she needs to so that we can go in and drop a file in. Boom. And so it brings us over here, it creates our flow. It says, hey, it's ready to go. It's on, and it'll trigger whenever you drop, when it's monitoring. But let's go ahead and take a look. So I'm going to click edit and just validate kind of what's happening here. Now notice here, this is just start an approval when a file is added to SharePoint. I don't like that. I'm going to say start approval on files uploaded, shared docs, and Power Platform demo site. Be very specific. That's all you have to do. Click in there and you just click that little save button over there. Okay. And so here it creates our flow for us, right? I mean, we didn't have to do any work for any of this. And notice we've got these little red dots right here. That means that, hey, if we mouse over that, it says, hey, this only runs if something fails, right? Run after creating approval has failed. So this lets me know that it failed, right? So up at the top, this is our trigger. We see that it's looking up to our Power Platform development site, to our library of documents. And notice we have advanced parameters. We're showing 1 of 2. Well, we can click the show all or click a drop down, and we can say, oh, show me that one. And just click in the white space, it adds it in. Do you want to limit columns by view? No. But also notice here it says, how often do you want to check? So this is brand new with SharePoint as a trigger. So we can actually expand that. The default is 3 minutes here. Thing is I want it to be faster. So I'm going to do 1 minute, but then I'm going to change the frequency to seconds, right? And so I'm going to click out of that. I'm going to click save. Sad part is this is going to throw an error because it can't look that fast. It can only look in quarters of minutes. So every 15 seconds. So it tells us here within our error message, hey, the reoccurrence frequency cannot be less than time with 15 seconds. Okay, well, I'll do 15 seconds then. And so what that does is says, hey, we're going to monitor this every 15 seconds, every 15 seconds. Next up, we have get my approval. I'm sorry, get my profile. So it's getting whoever submits, whoever added the document, it's getting your profile, that person's profile information. Here's our approval. Notice it's creating some out of the box kind of stuff already done. Added to, created by in UTC, right? You may want to change that. We can change this to be whatever we want. Just click in, add this in here and be like modified by. And when we do that, we have our cursor, we just click the little lightning bolt. When we pop over here, we have all of our actions that precede it. So we have our get my profile, and then we have the SharePoint library information. We can click that see more and see all the fields that are available on a file when it's populated. We can also use search up here. I'm going to type in mod for modified. Oh, lots of mods. So modified. There we go. And so notice modified by, we see modified by, and we have 5 options here. There's claims, display name, email, etc. on down the line. Thing is, modified by, that's a clickable thing. That's a person group lookup. That's a complex data source. It's an array of information. So for every modified by and created by, we have all of this information given to us by SharePoint. And so I'm going to use the display name so it actually shows who it's modified by. It'll be the same person, but just give you the show. And we can provide it with a link and a link description of whatever the file name is. Okay, and then once it, create the approval, notice here it creates an adaptive card in Teams to whomever the approval is going to say, hey, you got an approval over here. And then it waits for it. If this create approval fails, then it's going to email the requester, whoever dropped the file in, that, hey, this approval action failed, that user doesn't exist, etc. on down the line, and terminates the flow. Once it finishes, it's saying, hey, we're just waiting for it to finish. So it just doesn't continue on through our condition, because what it's going to look at is saying, oh, hey, what's the outcome of the approval? Hey, we want, if it's approved, go down true, otherwise not. And if it's approved, then it's going to go in and it's going to send a Teams message directly to the person who requested it of the approval and the approval comments. And then adversely, if it is denied or rejected, it's going to give that information as well. All right, let's test this thing out. I'm going to go ahead and click save since I added some stuff in here. We can also utilize Copilot. We'll look at another flow to take a look at that process, but we're just gonna drop in and we're gonna test this flow in our documents library. So I have a document kind of ready over here. It's the Power Platform Licensing Guide for October. And so I'm logged in as my friend Cora, and she's going to come over here and she's going to drop that PDF document into our documents library in the Power Platform development site. So I'm going to pop in over here. Teams, for some reason, is not loading for her. I don't know why. It keeps looping me into some crazy sign in. So we're not going to be able to see the anything from her side on the response. But if we pop in over here to my side, we can take a look and monitor this flow. We can click to go back, and we can see that, oh, hey, it's running over here. And so in this 28-day run history, we can just click this date time over here, and I'm going to open it into a new tab. We can actually watch it run and go through here, right? And so it's still creating the approval. This might be the first approval in this environment, so it might take a minute. I hope not. We'll let this kind of run here. Oh, there we go. So it's been created, didn't fail. So we see these little hash marks, meaning that these were skipped. Then we see the green check marks that says, oh, hey, this has been done. And then so if I click back over here into Teams, notice I now have a recent chat from Workflows. And this is all out of the box. This adaptive card, this comes from Teams. It's automatically generated from the approvals connector to be used in Teams. And it's almost exactly the same as the adaptive card if we sent this via email to me if I were to open this in email. So it says, hey, here's the information for the for this information that we had in here. It uses Markdown inside of the approval. So we have some bolding and ordered list. We have a link to the document. So if we click on that, we can actually open up that document and take a look at it. Like, oh, wow, that looks amazing. And then we can approve or reject. And notice down here, my little modified by, put in Cora Thomas. And so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click approve. Like, that looks great. And click submit. And if we pop back over to Power Automate, we'll see that, oh, hey, this will turn green with a check mark. And then Cora would get a Teams message. And if I could log in Teams with Cora, we'd be able to see that message. Any questions on starting from a template, taking a look at, anyone want to see something more specific inside of what we're looking at here? So one thing I will show us is here's our trigger. And when I mentioned that, hey, Power Automate runs on OData, Power Automate runs on OData, and we get JSON back. We're not parsing any JSON here, but this raw outputs from SharePoint, this is when the file was created. I have a whole bunch of headers here, and then here's our body. All this over here, this is all JSON. This is what, since it's only one record, we're able to, SharePoint Action automatically parses this out so we can get the modified information, who the editor is, that's the modified by. So there's our display name that we used, the modified by display name, that's Cora Thomas right there. And so as we go through here, we can kind of see this. And then most of these you won't see on the normal file. You won't see the file name extension. You won't see the full path here. You won't see the drive ID or the drive ID item. That's actually the document GUID that's associated with it. So if we were to click and open this, that file, we would actually be able to see kind of in the URL string, oh, hey, it document ID ? And then it provides it with this. That way we can access it from anywhere, right? It doesn't have to be a direct link into that SharePoint site. It can just be the document directly. Let's see, what's some other neat things? Yeah, that's that one. Other side of the house, I want to show you a flow that's more like, so that's a pretty simple, pretty easy thing to do. We started with it from a template, a fairly complicated flow that would, if we don't know how to build it, could take us a little while to do. But I have one that I created the other day that is different, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open these in new tabs. So this applied categories to email, and then here's one for break permissions. So for the break permissions, I'll show you that one first. This one, run and tested, worked with another customer to build this out. I'm going to dive into the edit. What this is doing, this flow, our trigger's a manual trigger here, right? And we have a parameter. It's a Boolean, re-inherit permissions, choose yes or no. I'm initializing a bunch of variables here, but what this is doing is actually, it's breaking permission list items on a library and it's breaking them. If I've already broken them, it re-inherits using a condition here, like, oh, hey, if I want to re-inherit, if it equals true, do all of this, otherwise don't. As it rolls on down, I have a scope here. It says set members to read for the library only. And this is using the SharePoint REST API. And the best part is that we don't have to use an HTTP. If we just click add an action here, and notice here's all the different actions that we have. Here's our runtime for built-in, standard, premium, custom. I'm going to type SharePoint HTTP, and there's a send an HTTP request for us. It doesn't cost us premium. It doesn't cost us any type of up level on the license, but we can utilize the SharePoint REST API to do things that we would normally have to do in PowerShell, right? But we can do it from Power Automate. And what this does is that it basically looks at this library here for the DL nested folders. It looks at this and it says, okay, it breaks the inheritance on this. And so like we can look at this restricted access, manage access. And if we go to advanced, what should show us here is that only owners, whoever this owners group is, only they have access to it. However, if I look at, say, folder 3 here, manage access, advanced, it has members, owners, and visitors in here. So that's what that flow actually does. It goes in and does that. And when we click on that HTTP request, we have our various GET methods, our URI. We have the ability to add headers and a body. Whether we have a post, get, patch, delete, put, we can do it along, but it's native to SharePoint, so we don't have to do any kind of special tokens or special access specifically for that. The other one that's even more advanced, it's even more advanced than this one, is that I had a customer ask a question, and someone asked it yesterday, sort of, in one of the other sessions, is, hey, can I automatically categorize my events in my Outlook calendar? And the answer is no, you can't use rules, but you can use Power Automate, right? And I posted the answer that Copilot gave me that tells you exactly what you need to do based on the event and updating that information. This one was, I want to categorize my email. I never even thought about categorizing my email. My calendar is a Technicolor coat of many colors. It's so many colors dealing with different types of customers that I work with, whether they're education or whether they're outside of education, whether they're internal meetings, if they're helping other people or being a part of the Power Up program that Microsoft runs for anyone to be able to level up and take a 12-week class on learning how to use the Power Platform. All those, my calendar is super colored. My inbox, not so much. And so what I ended up building, and it took me about 4 hours to figure out the best method. I was like, oh yes, I can build a switch statement, right? And say, hey, add in this category if the subject contains this. Well, I have it still looking up at the subject, but the thing is that you may not have the same categories that I do. And so what I'm doing here in this scope setting, initializing a lot of variables up here, but notice I'm parsing JSON too, right? So I'm getting this compose, which is the output of whatever the message is, and I'm parsing the JSON. And it says, hey, what is this? And I wrote this JSON code. Did I write all of that? Absolutely not. I ended up getting whatever the output was, that JSON, and I ended up clicking here, use a sample payload. Paste in whatever the output is and click done, and it automatically generates this for me. I didn't have to type a thing. It automatically did it for me. But what this is doing, it's actually looking up and saying, hey, get all of my categories that I have on my Outlook account, which I can use in my email and my calendar. And so it grabs all of that, and then it says, okay, check and see if it has a category. If not, if it does, put it in there. If the subject contains, so if I click in there, this condition here, if the subject, and I put everything in lowercase, because it may be some, people don't like to, type, all that kind of jazz. And so if it contains whatever the item is, whatever, if it has a value of the category, it's automatically going to add it. And the nice thing is that it's going to do that for every category. So if I use multiple categories on the same event or the same email, to where it's like education, general, transactional, and pod one, it's gonna map all of that together for my email to actually look like and be color coded, which was kind of interesting to see because I never thought I would ever use it, right? But I was like, that's cool. But wait a minute, let's see if we can build this to where it's shareable. So if somebody wants something like this and try to do it, you just let me know. Shoot me a text. I'll drop my email in the chat. Shoot it to me, and I'll shoot it by a sharing link. You can download this flow, and you can import it in, and it will work exactly for you and anyone else. It will work in any tenant. And so that's kind of the end of our demo session today. Any questions? Let me see. I've got a couple in the chat here. David, do you still need the paid license to run Power Automations on a schedule? Correct? No, you do not. No. What dictates whether or not you need a premium license, and I'll just add an action here, is if it has premium right here or has a diamond. So anything with Dataverse, etc. The triggers doesn't matter. You can use any of those, the scheduled flow, the instant flow, automated. If you're using a trigger from, so if I go in here and create and do like an instant cloud flow, and I'm just going to skip this. I'm not gonna give it a name. And so it says add a trigger. Here's all my stuff. If I'm using a trigger from Dataverse, then yes. But if we're looking for schedule, I'm just going to click on control here. Oh, it's not going to do that. Let me do this. Schedule. And it's under date. So reoccurrence over here, we can click the see more. It's the only one that's there. How often do you want this to happen? We'll say, every 3 minutes. You can choose the time zone. Say I only want to do it in Pacific, and you can choose a start time. But notice it needs to be UTC sortable. That's what that is, with the T, the time, and then Zulu at the end, which means UTC, right? No matter what our time zone is here. But the reoccurrence, you use any license. It's what actions come after that. If they're premium, then the flow is now a premium app, premium flow rather than a standard. Logan, do you prefer appending to variable or using select concat join for JSON? It depends on the situation. It really does depend on the situation. I don't like using select statements because usually I'm going to get my data how I want it, and I don't need a select statement. The only time I've really used select statements is if I'm getting data and it uses the backend column names, which are ugly, right? The schema names, and I want to rename the columns, like if I'm creating an HTML table from that table. And so if I want it to be, instead of admin underscore modified editor dot display name, like no, modified name, right? And so I change that column, and the select is to that value. And so I'm basically renaming the columns without having to type all of that out into HTML. But I've also used variables and append to string variables to build tables, right? We have our table header with our column titles, and then another variable that we say, hey, this is going to be our table row, that HTML text, right? And then we append to the string variable for each one of those. And then once it's done, we do some cleanup to make sure that we have the appropriate opening and close tags. And then I'll use a variable that's the closing for the table, and then have another variable that is either pull all that together in one and then put it in my email, or I'll put all three on separate lines, right? Just kind of depends on my mood. I've done it both ways, right? But it just kind of depends on the situation as to what the best way to fit is. Good questions. And yeah, time is up.